Hello everyone, I'm Bolen, and the question that I'm going to answer today is how does heat stress affect broiler production? And the reason that I chose this topic was because my dad is in the broiler production business for Tyson, and it is imperative that producers like him minimize mortality. And so we know that being in Southeast, or at least I'm from Southeast Oklahoma, and being in Oklahoma in general, we have pretty hot summers. And so heat stress is one of those factors that goes into producing a healthy and affordable chicken for the consumer. And so that is why I chose this question to answer today. So some statistics that go along with broiler production and how it relates to heat stress is $128 to $165 million is estimated in loss per year throughout the industry in relation to heat stress. And in return, that decreases our production, which of course hurts producers like my father and also companies like Tyson, and it also trickles down to the consumer. So we want to minimize those mortality rates as much as we can. So before we kind of figure out what the factors of heat stress are and what causes it, we first have to know what heat stress is. And so the thermoneutral zone for chicken is known to be 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. And so what that means is within that 18 to 20 degree window is where the chicken is comfortable, it's producing like it should, and everything is going great. Now, once you get outside of this range is when it becomes a problem. And so heat stress is considered a negative energy cycle. And so what that means is the heat that the chicken is producing is greater than the amount of heat that is going from the body into the environment. And so therefore the chicken is not being able to get rid of that extra heat that they are producing. And then the three stages of heat stress are alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. And so alarm is that first stage where you recognize that there is a stressor at hand, and you recognize that that's the problem. And then once we hit the resistance stage, that is when you know what the stressor is and the chicken is able to adapt to the environment to get back to normal. Then the final stage is exhaustion, where you know what the stressor is, the stressor occurs for a long amount of time, and the body is not able to adapt to the environment, therefore that causes issues. And then after the stages, it breaks it down into two categories for acute and chronic. And acute heat stress is just a sudden rise in temperature. It doesn't last very long. And of course, acute heat stress causes less detrimental factors. And then chronic heat stress is when the heat stress happens for a longer period of time, and that is where you see an increase in mortality and other negative impacts to the chicken. So now we get into some of the causes of heat stress. So as we all know, chickens have feathers, and so that is one of the reasons that they are not able to sweat or dissipate heat, give off that heat, and they also have limited amounts of sweat glands. And so some of these causes of heat stress are like external factors like sunlight, thermal radiation, humidity, but it can also be determined on the chicken characteristics such as sex, their species, and their metabolism rate. In addition to that, we see a rise in kind of heat stress problems because over time, chickens are continuing to be selected for fast growth and high efficiency, and so that in turn relates in increased metabolism and increased production of body heat, which is a cause of the heat stress. So other impacts of heat stress that I'm going to talk about are meat quality, immunity, and intestinal barriers. The first problem that I'm going to hit on is the effects on meat quality. And so when heat stress occurs, it causes an imbalance of electrolytes and stimulation of lipid peroxidation. And it also escalates the deposition of fat and decreases the protein content. And then past that, if we have acute heat stress, like I said, that's a limited amount of time. It's just a sudden rise in temperature. It will often lighten the color of the meat, which is not appealing to consumers. And then it also hinders the water holding capacity of the breast muscle, which is how the lightening of the colors kind of happens. And then with the chronic heat stress, some of that is still being researched to kind of determine what chronic heat stress affects, or what heat stress, or chronic heat stress, how it affects the meat quality. And then going off of that, within like 7 to 14 days, the studies show that there was no difference in meat quality, but past that 14-day period, there's a pH was decreased, and like I said, the lightness and drop loss was also increased, which resulted in tougher breast meat. And then it also resulted in increased lactate muscle, decreased protein synthesis, and it degrades the thigh muscle protein. So this is kind of a picture of what you see like a normal meat looks like for chicken, and then this is kind of what it would look like if heat stress had occurred. And you see it's kind of pale and it's soft, kind of like you get the PSE meat look in pork. So the next problem that we're going to encounter if we have chronic heat stress is immunity. And so, like anything else, increased vulnerability to pathogens is caused by heat stress, and that of course results in high mortality rates, increase in economic loss, and it can also cause a concern for human nutrition. And going off of that, the most prominent disease we're going to talk about is necrotic enteritis. So with the necrotic enteritis, we see that heat stress enhances the possibility of that occurring. And then in other studies, we see that unchallenged birds, it prompted that disease, and then in challenged bird, it increased the occurrence in extremity. And so with this disease, it inhibits their growth and decreases their feed intake and decreases the pH values in the intestine. Then the decreased pH in the intestine causes an intestinal barrier. And so where that comes into play is it decreases the function of the barrier that keeps the GI tract separate. So the blood flow goes from the skin rather than to the GI tract, and then it damages the barrier to the GI tract, which then increases the permeability of the intestinal wall and stimulates movement of endotoxins to the body, which then causes the inflammatory reactions. And so when the gut is healthy, it acts as a barrier to exclude the toxins and contagious agents. And so when it's unhealthy, which is when the heat stress occurs, bacteria can occupy the gut, which causes the environment to be disturbed. And then it decreases the nutrient absorption and causes defective immune system functions. And that all kind of ties into the same effects that everything else has. It leads to poor performance, high mortality, and enhanced susceptibility to diseases, which is not suitable for any broiler production. So this is kind of a picture, if you can kind of tell. This is a healthy mucosal layer, and these right here are the damaging mucosal integrity. And so they line this layer right here, and then over here you see where the barrier is broken. And so this is where the permeability takes place, and those toxins are able to impede the layer right here. And so another important thing to note is the lungs and kidney play a really good role in maintaining the acid-base ratio, and heat stress disrupts this process through panting, and that leads to a large amount of electrolyte excretion and loss of water, which is not good for the meat either. And so where you can record temperatures on the chicken, if you kind of want to know where they stand, is the rectum or the thorax, and it causes a positive correlation. So they're saying that when the environmental temperatures increase, so will the internal body temperature of the chicken. And then this is kind of just to sum it up, we see that heat and humidity lead to decreased activity, which leads to less feed intake, which leads to less nutrient deficiency, and then it'll also increase panting, and then it'll lead to the acid-base imbalance, which all of these cause decreased performance, poor efficiency, increased mortality, and lower profits for the producer. So in conclusion, in all of the studies that I found, heat stress negatively affects broiler production, and it's important for the producers to be aware of this because they want to maximize their profits while also providing consumers with an affordable and nutritious food like chicken. Thank you guys.